Didn't see you there, buddy. Coffee dripped from the table onto his jeans. The bully smirked. His friends laughed. The black father said nothing. He closed his book, stood slowly, and looked up. One look. That's all it took for the entire cafe to go silent. The bully had picked what he thought was an easy target. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Every Saturday at 9:30 in the morning, Ethan Cross walked into Morning Grind and ordered the same thing, black coffee, no sugar. The barista, a young woman named Maya with bright eyes and an easy smile, had stopped asking for his order months ago. Bah. She simply nodded when he came through the door and started pouring before he reached the counter. "Corner booth's open," Maya said, sliding the cup across to him. "Your throne awaits, Mr. Mysterious." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Appreciate it. He made his way to the back of the cafe, passing a handful of early risers hunched over laptops and newspapers. The corner booth sat against the wall, tucked beside a window that overlooked the quiet suburban street outside. Ethan slid into the seat with his back against the wall facing the entrance. It was a habit he had never been able to shake, even after 4 years of civilian life. Old instincts died hard. He pulled a worn paperback from his jacket pocket and set it on the table. The spine was cracked, the pages yellowed. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He had read it so many times the words had become part of him, but he kept returning to it anyway. There was comfort in the familiar. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon pastries. Soft jazz played from speakers mounted in the corners. Outside, a woman pushed a stroller down the sidewalk while her golden retriever trotted alongside. Ethan watched them pass, then turned his attention to the book. This was his ritual. 1 hour of silence before he picked up Zoe from her piano lesson at 11. 1 hour where he could pretend the world was as peaceful as this little cafe made it seem. He thought about his daughter probably sitting at the piano right now with her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth, the way it always did when she concentrated. 8 years old, and already more determined than most adults he had known. She had inherited that from her mother, Lena. The name surfaced in his mind like it always did, unbidden but not unwelcome. 4 years since the cancer took her, and the grief had softened into something he could carry without breaking. Most days, anyway. He remembered her voice in those final weeks, weak but unwavering, her hand gripping his with surprising strength. "Promise me something," she had whispered. "Let Zoe see a father who controls his strength, not one who's controlled by it." Ethan had spent 18 years in the Navy SEALs. He had seen combat in places whose names never made the news. He had done things that still visited him in dreams. When Lena got sick, he walked away from all of it without a second thought. Traded his trident for a carpenter's apron. Traded midnight raids for bedtime stories. He had never regretted it. Not once. The coffee was still hot when the front door swung open with enough force to rattle the bell above it. 3 men walked in, loud and laughing, their voices cutting through the cafe's gentle atmosphere like broken glass. Ethan glanced up briefly, then returned to his book. The man leading the group was big. Not muscular, but broad in a way that suggested he had been athletic once and let it go soft. He wore an expensive polo shirt, stretched tight across his gut, and a gold watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist. His companions flanked him like satellites, smaller and eager to please. 3 lattes, the big man announced to Maya, not bothering to look at her. "And make them quick. We've got places to be." Amaya's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Coming right up, Jay." Ethan turned a page. The words blurred as his attention shifted to the periphery of his vision, tracking the 3 men without appearing to watch them. Another old habit. The big man collected his drink and turned to find a seat. His eyes swept the cafe, dismissive and territorial, until they landed on Ethan in the corner booth. Something flickered across his face. Ethan had seen that look before. the look of a man who needed to feel powerful and had just identified someone he thought couldn't fight back. The collision was deliberate. The man walked directly into the edge of Ethan's table, hitting it hard enough to send coffee splashing across the wooden surface, across the pages of the book, and onto Ethan's jeans. "Oh, my bad," the man said, his voice dripping with false apology. He didn't step back, didn't offer to help, just stood there with a smirk spreading across his face. "Didn't see you there, buddy." K. His two companions snickered from a nearby table. Ethan looked down at the ruined book, at the brown stain spreading across his pants. Then he looked up at the man standing over him. He said nothing. The silence seemed to embolden the big man. He leaned in, slightly lowering his voice to a mocking whisper. "Philosophy books fancy stuff for someone like you. Thought your kind just read welfare applications." The cafe had gone quiet. Ethan could feel eyes on him, curious and uncomfortable. No one spoke. No one moved. "Name's Miller, by the way," the man continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Since you're probably wondering who just ruined your morning." Ethan closed the book slowly and set it aside. The coffee dripped off the table and onto the floor in a steady rhythm. "I'm not wondering anything," he said. His voice was calm, measured. "I'm asking you to walk away." Miller's smirk faltered for just a moment. There was something in the way this man spoke, something in his stillness, that didn't match the easy target he had expected. But the hesitation passed quickly. His friends were watching. The whole cafe was watching. He couldn't back down now. "Walk away!" Miller laughed, too loud and too forced. "From what a single dad having his little coffee break. What are you gonna do, call the cops? Run back to whatever hole you crawled out of? Oh." The words landed like calculated blows. Single dad. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. Miller had no idea what those words meant, what they represented. The sacrifices, the loss, the promise to a dying woman that he would raise their daughter right. He thought of Zoe, her laugh, her smile when she ran toward him after school, the way she curled against his chest during thunderstorms, trusting him completely. He thought of Lena's voice. "Let Zoe see a father who controls his strength." Ethan stood. The movement was unhurried, deliberate. He rose to his full height, and for the first time, Miller seemed to register that this quiet man was not small. Ethan's frame was lean but solid, the kind of build that came from decades of functional strength rather than gym vanity. A faded scar ran along his left forearm, visible now that he had pushed up his sleeves. "I don't want trouble," Ethan said quietly. "I just want to finish my coffee and pick up my daughter, so I'm going to ask you one more time. Walk away." Miller's eyes darted to his companions, then back to Ethan. The cafe remained frozen around them. Maya stood behind the counter with her hand hovering near the phone. An elderly man in the far corner had lowered his newspaper and was watching intently. Miller made his choice. "You think you scare me?" He stepped closer, invading Ethan's space, using his size to intimidate. "You're nothing. Just another black single dad trying to act tough. I've seen 100 of you." Ethan didn't move. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides, but something in his eyes shifted, a coldness settling in that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with assessment. He was reading Miller now, evaluating, calculating. Miller mistook the stillness for submission. He placed his palm flat against Ethan's chest and shoved. Ethan took one step back to absorb the force. Then he stood firm. "Last chance," he said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "You don't want to do this." But Miller was already past listening. His pride had been wounded. His audience was watching. He had committed to a path, and men like him never knew when to stop. "Or what?" He shoved again, harder this time. "What's a guy like you gonna do about it?" Sss. Ethan felt the wall press against his back. He had run out of room to retreat. The old familiar calm descended over him, the same calm he had felt in 100 firefights in moments where hesitation meant death. He looked at Miller, and for the first time he let the mask slip. Just a little. Just enough. "You have no idea who you're talking to." Miller's smirk flickered uncertainty crossing his features for just a fraction of a second before his bravado reasserted itself. He glanced back at his companions. Two men Ethan had already catalogued as followers rather than fighters. They sat at their table with lattes growing cold, watching the confrontation with the eager anticipation of spectators at a blood sport. "Derek Scott, you hear this guy?" Miller called out, his voice loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. "He thinks he's somebody." The two men laughed on cue, but there was nervousness in the sound. They had seen their boss bully plenty of people before, but something about this situation felt different. The quiet man against the wall wasn't reacting the way targets usually did. Miller turned back to Ethan, emboldened by his audience. He stepped closer, close enough that Ethan could smell the artificial sweetness of his latte on his breath. "You know what I think," Miller said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hiss. "I think you're exactly what you look like. A broke single dad pretending he's got some kind of dignity. Wife probably got smart and left you right, found someone better." The words hit deeper than Miller could possibly know. Ethan felt something twist in his chest, a cold fury that he immediately clamped down on. His breathing stayed even. His hands stayed still. But behind his eyes, images flashed unbidden Lena in the hospital bed, her beautiful face hollowed by illness, her hand reaching for his as the monitors beeped their final warnings. "Don't," Ethan said quietly. Miller heard the word but not the warning behind it. He leaned in even closer. "Don't what? Tell the truth, come on, man. We both know how this goes. You're gonna stand there and take it because that's what guys like you do. You don't have the guts to X." "Hey!" The voice came from across the cafe. Both men turned to see an elderly man rising from a corner table, his newspaper abandoned beside an empty coffee cup. He was thin and weathered, with white hair cropped short in a style that spoke of military discipline even decades after service. His movements were stiff with age, but there was steel in his spine as he approached. "That's enough," the old man said firmly. "Leave him alone." Miller's face contorted with annoyance. "Mind your own business, Grandpa. This doesn't concern you." "I'm making it my concern." The old man stopped a few feet away, his pale blue eyes moving between Miller and Ethan with the measured assessment of someone who had seen conflict before. "Whatever problem you think you have, it's not with this man. Walk away." Miller's companion Derek rose from his seat, moving to intercept. "You heard him, old-timer. Back off before you get hurt." What happened next was quick. Derek reached out to push the elderly man aside, his palm connecting with the old man's shoulder. The force wasn't much, but it was enough to make him stumble backward, his hip catching the edge of a table. Zer. Ethan moved. He didn't think about it. 18 years of training had wired certain responses directly into his nervous system, bypassing conscious thought entirely. One moment he was standing with his back against the wall. The next he was at the old man's side, one hand steadying his arm, his body positioned between the elderly stranger and Derek. You okay?" Ethan asked, his voice low and controlled. The old man nodded, but his eyes had fixed on Ethan with sudden intensity. As Ethan had reached out to steady him, his sleeve had ridden up, exposing the inside of his wrist. There, partially hidden by the band of his watch, was a small tattoo. A skeletal frog, its bones arranged in the shape of a trident. The bone frog, the memorial symbol for fallen Navy SEALs. The old man's breath caught almost imperceptibly. He looked up at Ethan's face, then back at the tattoo, then up again. Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that went beyond the surface. Ebb. "You served?" he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't answer. He helped the man straighten up, then turned back to face Miller and his companions. The cafe had gone absolutely silent. Maya stood frozen behind the counter, her hand finally touching the phone she had been hovering near. A young woman at a nearby table had raised her cell phone, recording everything with trembling hands. Aka. Miller had watched the exchange with growing confusion. The easy target he had selected was proving to be something else entirely, and the situation was slipping out of his control. But rather than reassess, rather than recognize the danger signs, he doubled down. "Touching," he sneered. "The welfare case saves the senior citizen. What a hero!" He moved toward Ethan, his larger frame intended to intimidate. "Here's what's going to happen," Miller said, jabbing a finger toward Ethan's chest. "You're going to apologize for wasting my time. Then you're going to pick up your little philosophy book and get out of my sight. And maybe if you're lucky, I won't follow you out to the parking lot and finish what we started." Add. Ethan watched the finger approaching his chest. In his mind, he mapped out 17 different ways to break it. "I'm going to say this once," Ethan said. His voice had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something flat and clinical. "You need to step back. Right now." Miller laughed, but it came out wrong, too high and too sharp. "Or what? That's not a threat. It's information." The old man had moved back toward the tables, but he hadn't retreated far. He stood watching with an expression that mixed concern with something else, something that might have been anticipation. "Son," he called out to Miller, his voice carrying the rasp of age but none of its weakness. "I don't know what your problem is, but you need to listen to him. Trust me on this." Miller didn't even look at him. His attention was fixed on Ethan, on this man who refused to cower, who refused to break. "I'm done talking," Miller said, and his hand shot out to grab Ethan's collar. Ethan caught the wrist before it reached him. The movement was economical, almost lazy, but suddenly Miller found his arm twisted at an angle that sent white-hot pain shooting up to his shoulder. He gasped, his knees buckling slightly, his other hand scrabbling uselessly at Ethan's grip. "Let go of me," Miller hissed through clenched teeth. "Not yet." Ethan's voice remained perfectly calm. "First, you're going to apologize to that man for shoving him. Then you're going to take your friends and leave, and then we're going to forget this ever happened." Ah. Derek and Scott had risen from their seats, uncertain what to do. They had never seen anyone handle Miller like this. The man they followed because he seemed powerful now looked small and helpless, his face contorted in pain as this stranger held him in place with what appeared to be minimal effort. "I said let go!" Miller's voice cracked, the command coming out as more of a plea. Ethan released him. Miller stumbled backward, clutching his wrist to his chest. His face had flushed a deep red humiliation and rage warring for dominance. Around them, the cafe remained frozen. The woman with the phone kept recording. Maya's hand hovered over the phone, paralyzed by indecision. The old man watched with knowing eyes. "AJ, you're done," Miller snarled, finding his voice again. "You have no idea who I am. I'll have cops here in 5 minutes. I'll have you arrested for assault." Ethan said nothing. He stood perfectly still, his weight balanced evenly on both feet, his arms relaxed at his sides. Anyone trained in combat would have recognized the stance. It was the posture of a man who was ready for anything. "Aki." "Derek Scott," Miller barked. "Get over here." The two men exchanged glances. Neither moved. Al Miller's face twisted. He was losing control, losing face, and every second that passed made it worse. The eyes of the cafe were on him, judging him, watching him fail to dominate a man he had dismissed as nothing. "Fine," he spat. "Fine. You want to do this yourself? We'll do this ourselves." He advanced on Ethan, fists clenched. Ethan didn't retreat. There was nowhere to go. The wall pressed against his back, the tables hemmed him in on either side. He was cornered, but somehow that didn't seem to worry him. "Walk away," Ethan said one final time. "I'm giving you this chance because I don't want trouble. But if you swing at me, I will put you on the ground. That's not a threat. That's a promise." And Miller heard the words, but pride had deafened him to reason. He had been embarrassed. He had been defied. In front of witnesses, in front of his own people, a man he had dismissed as worthless had made him look weak. There was only one way to restore his dignity. His right fist came around in a wide-looping haymaker aimed at Ethan's jaw. It was the punch of an amateur, someone who had won fights through intimidation rather than skill. Telegraphed, clumsy, and slow. To Ethan, it might as well have been moving underwater. He shifted his head 2 inches to the left. The fist sailed past his ear, disturbing the air, but nothing else. Miller's momentum carried him forward off balance and overextended. In the space between heartbeats, Ethan moved. His left hand intercepted Miller's wrist, guiding the failed punch further off course. His right hand came up under Miller's elbow, applying pressure to the joint in a way that made resistance impossible. He pivoted his hips, using Miller's own weight against him, and suddenly the larger man was spinning his feet, tangling his center of gravity, betraying him. Miller hit the floor hard. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a whoosh. Before he could recover, Ethan was on him. One knee pressed into the small of his back. One hand pinned his wrist behind him at an angle that promised broken bones if he struggled. The other hand pressed down on the back of his neck, not choking, just controlling. The whole sequence had taken less than 4 seconds. Aki. The cafe erupted in whispers. Someone gasped. A coffee cup clattered against a saucer. The woman with the phone nearly dropped it, her hands shaking so badly the footage would probably be blurred. Derek and Scott stood paralyzed, their faces pale. They had seen bar fights, they had seen street brawls, but they had never seen anything like this. The man on top of Miller hadn't fought. He had dismantled. Every movement precise, every action purposeful, with no more emotion than a mechanic disassembling an engine. "Stay down," Ethan said quietly. His voice was steady, conversational even. "Don't move, don't speak. Just stay down until the police arrive." Miller's face was pressed against the floor coffee, and dust smeared across his cheek. He writhed once, testing Ethan's grip, and immediately went still as pain lanced through his shoulder. "Who the hell are you?" he managed to gasp, as Ethan didn't answer. The old man approached slowly. He looked down at Miller, then up at Ethan, and something like a sad smile crossed his weathered face. "SEAL?" he asked quietly. Ethan met his eyes but said nothing. The silence was answer enough. Maya had finally picked up the phone. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the dispatcher, describing what she had witnessed with the halting uncertainty of someone whose worldview had just shifted on its axis. The young woman with the recording had lowered her phone, staring at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time. Derek and Scott had not moved from where they stood, frozen by an instinct older than thought, the prey response that recognizes a predator and knows better than to attract its attention. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. Ethan maintained his position without apparent effort. His breathing was slow and even. His heartbeat, if anyone could have measured it, would have registered barely above resting. This was what 18 years of training had given him, the ability to wait, to endure, to remain utterly calm in the eye of any storm. He thought about Zoe, about the promise he had made to pick her up at 11. He glanced at the clock on the cafe wall. 9:57. He had time. He would always have time for her. He thought about Lena. About her voice, her smile, the way she had looked at him when he came home from deployment, equal parts relief and reproach. She had worried about him constantly, worried that the violence would follow him home, worried that the man she married would be consumed by the warrior she had fallen in love with. "I'm still here," he thought. "I'm still the man you believed in." On the floor beneath him, Miller had stopped struggling. His breath came in ragged gasps, his earlier bravado replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. For the first time in perhaps his entire adult life, he had encountered a situation that his money, his position, and his size could not control. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The old man settled into a chair nearby. "Vietnam," he said to no one in particular. "1st Cavalry Division, 68 to 70. He looked at Ethan. "I know what it looks like. A man who's seen the elephant. You never really lose it, do you?" Ethan adjusted his grip slightly, keeping Miller immobilized without causing unnecessary pain. "No, sir," he said softly. "You never do." The sirens grew louder, then stopped. Doors slammed outside. Footsteps approached. 2 officers pushed through the cafe door, hands resting on their belts as they assessed the scene. The older one moved with the deliberate calm of experience, his eyes sweeping the room before settling on Ethan and the man pinned beneath him. His nameplate read, Rodriguez. His partner, a younger officer named Thompson, hung back near the entrance, one hand hovering near his radio. "Everyone stay where you are," Rodriguez announced. His voice carried authority without aggression. "Someone want to tell me what happened here?" Maya spoke first, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The man on the floor started it. He knocked over this gentleman's coffee on purpose, said terrible things, pushed an elderly customer, and then threw a punch. The other man was just defending himself. I saw everything." The young woman with the phone stepped forward, holding up her device. "I recorded the whole thing. He's telling the truth. That guy on the ground swung first." Rodriguez nodded slowly, processing the information. He approached Ethan, stopping a few feet away. "Sir, I'm going to need you to release him and step back. Nice and slow." Ethan complied without hesitation. He lifted his knee from Miller's back, released his grip on the pinned wrist, and rose to his feet in one fluid motion. He took 3 steps backward, putting distance between himself and Miller, then raised his hands to shoulder height, where both officers could see them clearly. Miller scrambled up from the floor, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Coffee stains smeared his expensive polo. His hair was disheveled, and a red mark was forming on his cheek where it had pressed against the floor. "Arrest him!" Miller shouted, jabbing a finger at Ethan. "He attacked me! I want him charged with assault!" Rodriguez turned to look at Miller with an expression of practiced neutrality. "Sir, I have multiple witnesses and video evidence indicating you initiated the physical confrontation. I'd suggest you calm down." "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? I'm a senior manager at Hartley Real Estate. I know people. I'll have your badge for this." Thompson had moved closer, his young face tight with tension. "Sir, you need to lower your voice." Miller ignored him, his attention fixed on Rodriguez. "I want to press charges. That man assaulted me." Rodriguez sighed. It was the sound of a man who had dealt with 1,000 Millers in his career and expected to deal with 1,000 more. "Here's what's going to happen," he said evenly. "We're going to review the video. We're going to take statements from witnesses. And based on what I've already heard, you're going to be placed under arrest for assault and disorderly conduct." He nodded to Thompson. "Cuff him." Miller's face went pale. "You can't be serious." But Thompson was already moving, pulling Miller's arms behind his back with practiced efficiency. The click of handcuffs seemed unnaturally loud in the silent cafe. "You have the right to remain silent." Thompson began reciting the familiar words as he guided Miller toward the door. "This isn't over," Miller shouted over his shoulder. "I'll sue everyone in this room. You'll hear from my lawyer." The door swung shut behind them, cutting off his threats. Derek and Scott had already slipped out during the commotion, abandoning their leader to face the consequences alone. Rodriguez turned back to Ethan, studying him with renewed interest. In the movement of raising his hands, Ethan's sleeves had ridden up past his wrists. The bone frog tattoo was fully visible now, and beside it, partially extending up his forearm, was another tattoo, the words SEAL Team 3, arched above a trident with a motto inked below in small, precise letters. "The only easy day was yesterday." Rodriguez's expression shifted. He was a big man himself, broad-shouldered and solid, but something in his posture changed. A subtle straightening, a flicker of recognition. "Navy SEAL," he asked quietly, his tone different from before. Ethan lowered his hands. "Senior Chief Ethan Cross, retired." Rodriguez nodded slowly. He glanced at the tattoos again, then back at Ethan's face. "I did 8 years in the Marines," he said. "Never made it to your level, but I know what that trident means." He extended his hand. "Thank you for your service, Senior Chief." Ethan shook it. "Appreciate that." Rodriguez pulled out a small notebook. "I'm going to need a statement from you, but based on what I've seen and heard, this is clearly self-defense. You gave him every opportunity to walk away. He chose differently." He looked up from his notes. "Do you want to press charges with this evidence? Assault charges would stick." Ethan considered the question. He thought about Miller's face twisted with impotent rage as he was led away. He thought about the time it would take, the court appearances, the disruption to his carefully constructed life of quiet routine. He thought about Zoe waiting for him at the music school. "No," he said. "I just want to go home." Rodriguez studied him for a moment, then nodded with something like respect. "Understood. We have your contact information if we need anything else." He tucked the notebook away. "Take care of yourself, Senior Chief." The old man approached as Rodriguez moved off to speak with other witnesses. His pale blue eyes were warm as he extended a weathered hand. "Frank Morrison," he said. Ethan clasped his hand firmly. "Ethan Cross. You showed remarkable restraint in there, son. That man had no idea how close he came to something much worse." Ethan released the handshake. He wasn't worth the trouble. Frank smiled, a sad and knowing expression. "No, they never are." He patted Ethan's shoulder, once the gesture carrying decades of shared understanding. "You take care of that little girl of yours. That's the mission that matters now." "Yes, sir." Maya appeared at Ethan's elbow, holding a paper cup with a cardboard sleeve. Steam rose from the opening. "Black coffee, no sugar," she said, offering it to him. "On the house. Actually on me." Her eyes were wide still, processing what she had witnessed. "I had no idea you were... you always seemed so quiet." Ethan accepted the cup with a small smile. "Quiet is the goal." He picked up his ruined book from the table, coffee-stained pages warped and swollen. The words of Marcus Aurelius blurred, but not destroyed. He tucked it into his jacket pocket anyway. "Thank you," he said to Maya, "for calling the police, for speaking up." She shook her head. "Thank you. That guy's been coming in here for months, acting like he owns the place. Maybe now he'll think twice." Ethan nodded and headed for the door. The cafe had begun to return to normal conversations, resuming in hushed tones, the ordinary rhythm of Saturday morning reasserting itself. But eyes followed him as he walked out, and he knew that for these people, for this one small corner of the world, the story of what happened here would be told and retold for a long time. He didn't care about that. He had somewhere to be. The drive to the music school took 12 minutes. Ethan pulled into the parking lot at 10:58, 2 minutes before Zoe's lesson ended. He turned off the engine and sat in the silence, letting the tension drain from his muscles. His hands were steady on the steering wheel. His breathing was slow and even. But inside, something was settling, a storm that had been stirred now, finding calm water again. He thought about Lena, about the promise he had made in that hospital room, her fingers intertwined with his, her voice barely a whisper, but her words carved into his soul. "I kept my word," he said softly to the empty car. "I controlled it. I didn't let it control me." The door of the music school opened, and children began streaming out. Parents emerged from parked cars, calling names, waving. Ethan stepped out of his truck and waited. And then he saw her. Zoe came through the door like a burst of sunshine, her curly hair bouncing in 2 puffs on either side of her head, her backpack covered in glittery star stickers. She scanned the parking lot with eager eyes, and when she spotted him, her whole face transformed. "Daddy!" She ran to him at full speed, backpack bouncing, and launched herself into his arms. He caught her easily, lifting her off the ground, holding her close. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and the faint mustiness of the practice room. "Hey, baby girl," he murmured into her hair. "Daddy, guess what I played the whole song today without messing up? Mrs. Patterson said I did amazing." Ethan set her down, crouching to meet her eyes. "I'm so proud of you, Zoe. You've been working so hard." Zoe beamed. Then her expression turned serious with the gravity only an 8-year-old could muster. "You promised we'd get ice cream today. You didn't forget, did you?" Ethan stood, taking her small hand in his. "Have I ever forgotten a promise to you?" "No," she admitted, swinging their joined hands as they walked toward the truck. "But I'm just making sure." "Chocolate chip cookie dough?" he asked. "With rainbow sprinkles?" "With rainbow sprinkles?" he confirmed. They walked together across the parking lot, father and daughter, their shadows stretching long in the late morning sun. No one watching them would have guessed what had happened less than an hour ago. No one would have looked at the quiet man in the gray Henley and seen the warrior beneath the surface. And that was exactly how Ethan wanted it. He helped Zoe into the truck, buckled her seatbelt, and closed the door. Before walking around to the driver's side, he stood for a moment looking up at the clear blue sky. "I'm still here, Lena," he thought. "I'm still the man you believed in, and I'm raising her right, just like I promised." He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. Zoe chattered beside him about her piano lesson, about her friend Sophie, about the ice cream she was going to order. He listened to every word, nodding in the right places, smiling when she said something funny. This was his life now. This was his mission, and it was the only one that had ever truly mattered. Never underestimate a man who chooses to live quietly. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes the most dangerous people are those who have nothing left to prove. And maybe that's the lesson worth remembering. We all face moments when someone tries to make us feel small, when the easy choice is to fight back with anger or walk away in shame. But true strength isn't about proving yourself to strangers. It's about knowing who you are and what you're fighting for. For Ethan, it was never about Miller. It was about keeping a promise to the woman he loved and being the father his daughter deserves. If this story moved you, or if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. And if you want more stories like this, stories about quiet courage, real strength, and the moments that define us, subscribe to this channel. We'll see you in the next one.